Today, we're diving into a projection of what the U.S. economy could look like in the near future, all because of a potential massive shift in trade policy. We're going to break down what these new policies actually are and, the really important part, how they could trickle down and affect everything from your bank account to the nation's overall economic health. But before we get lost in all the numbers and charts, let's bring this down to earth. Because when we're talking about tariffs and trade wars, we're not just talking about some abstract economic theory. Nope, we're talking about real-world changes that could actually hit home for you. All right, let's get into the heart of it. To really grasp the potential ripple effects here, we've got to start at the source. And that source is a fundamental change in how the United States might approach trade with the rest of the world. So there are two main proposals driving this whole projection. First up, a huge 60% tariff that would target, specifically, every single thing imported from China. And then there's a second, even broader idea called a universal baseline tariff, which, as the name suggests, would apply to imports from, well, everywhere. Okay, so what in the world is a universal baseline tariff? The easiest way to think about it is like a flat tax on basically everything coming into the country. This isn't about targeting one specific product or one specific nation. It's a really broad approach that's designed to raise the price of imported goods across the board. So, what's the first thing that happens when policies like these are put into motion? Well, according to this analysis, the very first domino to fall isn't on some global economic map. It's actually a lot closer to home. Exactly. Before we can even start talking about things like GDP or global supply chains, we have to talk about the price tags on the stuff you buy every single day. The initial shock from these kinds of broad tariffs is almost always a direct hit right to your wallet. And the number this projection lands on, well, it's a big one. The analysis suggests that these policies could tack on more than $1,200 to the annual expenses for a typical American household. And let's be clear, this isn't just a tiny price bump. It represents a pretty significant jump in the cost of living. We're talking about everything from electronics to clothes to groceries. It's a cost that gets passed down from the importers to the stores and then ultimately to you. Now, you might be thinking, won't companies just find a workaround? And yeah, they'd try. We'd almost certainly see something called trade diversion. That's where businesses scramble to move their supply chains out of China to dodge that massive 60% tariff, maybe shifting to places in Southeast Asia. But, and this is the big but, with that universal baseline tariff in place on all imports, even though some costs might get dodged, the overall price of imported goods is still expected to go up. Okay, so let's zoom out. We've seen how this hits your wallet. Now let's look at how all those individual price hikes add up and start to affect the entire U.S. economy. Because when lots of things get more expensive all at once, it puts the whole system in a pretty tough spot. So, on one side of the equation, you've got inflation. It's pretty straightforward. When imported goods cost more, that pushes up the overall level of prices in the economy. Businesses have to pay more for their materials, and guess who that cost eventually gets passed on to? Us. And here's where you can see the problem taking shape. See, the Federal Reserve, the Fed, has a target for inflation. Their magic number is 2%. But this projection shows core PCE inflation, which is the Fed's favorite way to measure it, creeping up to somewhere between 2.4 and 2.6%. So it's moving in the wrong direction, away from that stable price target. But that's only half of the squeeze, because at the exact same time that prices are heating up, this projection shows the engine of the economy, well, it's starting to slow down. Think about it. Higher prices mean people have less money to spend, and that slows down economic growth. The projection for real GDP falls into the 1.5% to 2% range. Now, this nasty combination of rising inflation and slowing growth has a name that economists absolutely hate to hear: stagflationary pressure. It creates a really, really difficult economic environment. So this whole messy situation puts one group in a particularly brutal spot: the Federal Reserve. Their whole job is to keep prices stable and keep people employed. But in a scenario like this, those two goals start pulling in completely opposite directions. So you'd think the answer is simple, right? Inflation's going up, so the Fed just needs to raise interest rates to cool the economy down. That's the textbook move. But what do you do when the economy is already slowing down on its own? And here is the big twist in this whole projection. The analysis suggests that the Fed would actually be more worried about the slowing growth than the rising inflation. So instead of raising rates, this projection actually shows the Fed cutting interest rates in 2026, trying to give the economy a boost, even while prices are still running hot. I mean, it's just an unbelievably difficult balancing act. You're basically choosing between two bad options. Do you fight inflation and risk pushing the economy into a recession, or do you try to boost growth and risk letting inflation spiral? There are absolutely no easy answers here. Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. Let's put together a final snapshot of what this whole projected economic world could actually look and feel like for you in early 2026. It really is a simple chain reaction when you lay it out. Step 1, the cause. New trade policies are put in place. Step 2, the immediate effect. Your cost of living goes up and inflation climbs. And step 3, the reaction. The whole economy slows down, which forces policymakers into making some really tough, complicated choices. And this quote from the analysis just nails it. The key phrase here is stagflationary pressure. That's the big takeaway. It's a tough environment that squeezes you from two sides. Your wallet gets hit with higher costs, and the broader economy gets weaker with slower growth. And all of this leaves us with one final, really big question. When we look at these kinds of projections, we have to think about the trade-offs. If these policies are meant to protect certain industries, what's the actual cost? And at the end of the day, who pays for it? That is definitely something worth thinking about.